Good morning, everybody. It is amazing to see you all here. My name is Dave Miller. I am the host of a radio show on Oregon Public Broadcasting called Think Out Loud. It is a great pleasure and a very, very humbling honor to be here in front of you all and to welcome you to this event. In just a few minutes, we're going to hear from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, as well as our other illustrious guests. Before we begin, we ask a little bit of housekeeping, that we ask that you turn off or silence your cell phone or anything else that might make beeps and bloops and sounds. Flash photography and recording devices are not allowed during today's events. You can join the conversation online. If you're on Twitter, the hashtag is Dalai Lama PDX. You can get your questions in right now for His Holiness and our other guests. We're going to be sifting through them as we go, and if they fit into the conversation as we go, we will work them into our conversation. Just as a reminder, if you are going to be using your cell phone to get us questions, please do put it on silent first. Now, please join me in welcoming some of our panelists. Andrea Durbin is the Executive Director of the Oregon Environmental Council. It's a nonprofit that works toward clean air and water, a healthy climate, and sustainable food and farms. And David Suzuki is an esteemed Canadian scientist, educator, and environmental activist. He was trained as a geneticist, but for more than 50 years, he has also been an award-winning television and radio broadcaster. Andrea Durbin and David Suzuki. I want to point out that I want to thank Melinda Dinshaw, the pianist, who's been serenading us as part of this introduction. And to point out that the photographs that you've been enjoying as we've been getting ready for this conversation were taken by Jerry Ellis, an amazing Portland-based photographer who's been taking nature photography and other kinds of photographs for many decades now. He's working on something called The Great Ape Diaries right now, which is a beautiful and arguably very tragic project. He's trying to document the great apes in the wild in Central Africa and parts of Asia before there are no longer great apes in the wild. His name is Jerry Ellis. I recommend checking out his work. I also want to thank the Tibetan cultural performers who entertained us earlier this morning. We've just gotten word that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is en route. In case you didn't realize, there's been a press conference where he was talking to members of the press. It's just ended, and he'll be joining us shortly, so sit tight. The man you've been waiting for very patiently is almost here. I understand that our distinguished guests are almost here. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley, Oregon Governor John Kitzhaber, Geshe Thupten Jinpa, who will serve as a translator, and His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama.
Hi, Governor. How are you?
Yes.
Salmon.
I just
Good. There you go. Sit down. Oh.
Welcome, everyone. It's so tremendous to have you here, and of course, we are so honored to have His Holiness the Dalai Lama back in Oregon after 12 years. Isn't it great to have him back? And to be here at this moment to have a conversation about our stewardship of our world, of our planet, of our environment, one of the most important things that any of us could be considering. I'd like everyone to lift your hand and wiggle four fingers. Thank you. Now you're wondering, why am I asking you to do that? Is the greatest threat to our planet the 400 asteroids that are approaching us and perhaps might collide? Or is it 400 viruses that might attack humankind and cause destruction? No, neither of those. But it is the 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide poisoning in the atmosphere. I think this is perhaps the most important number we could be thinking about right now. It has long been a symbolic measurement of mankind's success or our failure to battle carbon dioxide pollution and a steady progression towards planetary catastrophe. The very significant and deeply troubling news is that 2 days ago, our planet, for the first time in the history of humans, reached that mark, 400. May 9th, 2013. Even more troubling, the rate is growing faster. When it was first measured in 1958 and the 20 years thereafter, it grew at 1 part per million per year. In the last 20 years, it's grown at 2 parts per million per year. This is a challenge we're facing. Can human civilization on this planet reverse this pollution and save our environment? We are seeing the consequences everywhere we look: the shrinking glaciers, the thinning ice sheets, the more powerful hurricanes and the more severe droughts, the shifting plant and insect populations, the higher ocean acidity. This is a challenge for our generation. And here we have a panel to address what we must do in terms of changing our habits, in terms of changing our energy economy, in terms of changing our hearts. I believe that each of the panelists have been introduced. Has Governor Kitzhaber been introduced as well before? No. Then I just want to note that Governor Kitzhaber, a tremendous governor of the state of Oregon. A long personal history of environmental advocacy. He leads a state where we pride ourselves of having been on the forefront of environmental issues, the beach bill, the bottle bill, our statewide land use planning, one of the most aggressive renewable energy strategies in the nation. And assuming the other panelists have been introduced, yes? It is now my pleasure to introduce His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When he was a young man, he relates that he could drink from the crystal clean streams of Tibet. He's witnessed a lot of changes in this world's environment in his nearly 80 years. He's become a powerful global voice for a moral and spiritual vision of environmental responsibility and stewardship. He has called upon global leaders to prioritize the issue of global warming above all else. And he has said, we are the only species with the power to destroy the earth, yet if we have the capacity to destroy, so too do we have the capacity to protect. Please join me in welcoming a tremendous panel that is going to address these profound issues of environmental changes in our planet. And of course, we are so honored again to have His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Your Holiness, I wonder if you could start us off this morning with some of your thoughts on the environment.
As he already mentioned, in early part of my life, not knowing the environmental issue, then gradually, as a result of my own experience, and mainly meeting with a specialist in environmental issue. So then I realized it's really very serious matter. One way, of course, protection or taking care about our world means simply like taking care of one's own home. And then things always is changing. As the person is mentioned, firstly, I think the 1,000 years, thousand, you see, planet's its own position is changing. And after all, whole universe, or Milky Way galaxy itself, is moving. According, many years ago, according to one scientist, the direction all galaxies moving, same direction, another galaxy is coming. So after perhaps a few billions of years, crash will come. So then no need any concern, any worry. So things are, you see, impermanent. Yeah. Of course, these things will not happen within, I think, the next few centuries. I don't think any danger. So in any way, so things are moving and change different position. So these climate, all these things, you see, accordingly, you see, some disturbances there. However, the many experts, they say, now for example, take us under lung tokoti. Mare, chukut khasa. The ozone layer melting.
Emission of carbon dioxide.
These, you see, we have a responsibility. And also deforestation. And sometimes you see dam, it's used, but we have to sort of consult with specialists, with scientists, very carefully. Otherwise, just yesterday, for power, regardless of what sort of consequences about environment, then these things are really a serious matter. So, to some extent, our own behavior also makes differences. In that field, we have the responsibility. So once our own home, some destructions happen. It is our own home. I always telling people, there's no possibility. 1959, come from Tibet, escaped to India. Okay. But now whole world, some problem. There is no other place escape. Moon, I think, through centuries, poetic sort of expression mentioned.
Inspiration for poets.
Moon and darks, night, moonlight, that things. But if we go there, try to settle there, impossible, horrible, no hope. So therefore, this is only home. We have to take care. Not only our generation. Of course, yesterday also I mentioned I'm a Buddhist monk. So no worry about my children's sort of life. But I think Governor also, I think, have some children and grandchildren. So you see, you have to sort of think seriously about their lifetime in future. Unless we take maximum care about our environment, I think nature disaster in any case will increase. Then I think due to global warming, and then I think, and then most serious is the population increasing. According to some sort of expert, I heard one report, the end of this century, population will reach 10 billions. Now, 7 billion. Now, next few decades, 10 billion. Then meantime, I always feel really very serious sort of concern, the gap rich and poor. Global level, also there's huge gap, rich and poor. And national level also, you see, there's a real gap. Like America, I think most richest, powerful nation. But at the same time, many poor people still there. One time in Washington, I some talk. I mentioned the capital of the most powerful and richest nations, capital, the suburb Washington. Many poor people. This gap not only morally wrong, but practically also source of problem. So therefore, we have to think how to reduce this gap. That does not mean the richer should be poor, no. The poorer section of people, their living standards must uplift, must raise. So then nature resources, already some problems there. So with end of this century, 10 billion, I think there will be a lot of problems. So we have to think very seriously about the future of humanity. So environment issue is, I think, one of the key factors. Then just I mentioned one television interview there, due to global warming, the South Pole and North Pole ice quite rapidly now melting. So sea level rising. And also the climate now change. And also earthquake. All these. So we have to now, we should be some kind of alert. And with alertness, demoralize, no. Alertness, wake up our mind, and holistic view, think long-term interest. Sometimes we simply forget long-term interest, simply the immediate sort of interest, and due to greed and impatience. So these, I think, we have to think we have to, we have to develop new way of life, new way of thinking. I think that's important. I feel like that. Otherwise, I'm not specialist, so I'm waiting the specialist sort of the precise sort of the presentation and the guidance. I'm waiting.
Thank you, Your Holiness. It's a perfect framework for the rest of our conversation, talking about behavior and responsibility, talking about science, talking about population and growth, about gaps between rich and poor, about global connections, all themes that I think we can return to as we go in this conversation. One theme that you mentioned is this is it. This is our only home. We're not going to go to the moon. David Suzuki, when you look at how we're doing on our one chance, one place we can live, what's your assessment?
Well, there are a lot of people I have a great deal of respect for in the world who are saying we've passed too many tipping points to go back. The announcement of 400 parts per million, absolutely catastrophic. And Clive Hamilton, an eco-philosopher from Australia, I have a great deal of respect for, has written a book called Requiem for a Species. And guess what species it's a requiem for? I don't see the point, though, in saying it's too late. We're going to struggle and work, but I think right to the end. But I think the challenge we face is the one His Holiness is pointing out. We act through the lenses of the way that we see the world. And I believe that the great challenge is that very recently we've acquired the sense that we're in control. We've lost our sense of what our home is. Somehow we've removed ourselves from nature, which is the source of everything that matters to us. And we have to reinsert ourselves back into the world, see the exquisite interconnectivity of everything, and get on with protecting the natural world and bringing our own behavior back into balance.
Where do you see that disconnect? Where do you see that we've cut ourselves off from the natural?
For 99% of our existence, we knew that we were deeply embedded in and utterly dependent on nature. Nature was the source of everything that we needed to survive and flourish. For 95% of our existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We followed animals and plants wherever they were through the seasons. In the last 10,000 years, we became farmers. In 1900, when there were 1.5 billion people in the world, the vast majority of us lived in rural village communities because we were farmers. And farmers know that weather, climate, the seasons fundamentally affect our ability to survive and flourish. They know that insects are necessary to pollinate flowering plants. They understand that certain plants can create a fertilizer in the soil by fixing nitrogen. Farmers understand we are embedded in nature. But I believe we went through this huge shift in 100 years from agricultural, village-living animals to big city dwellers. And in a big city, our highest priority becomes, as long as there are parks out there where we can go and play and camp, in a city, our highest priority becomes our jobs, because we need jobs to earn the money to buy the things that we want. And so the economy becomes our highest priority. And so you see it in spades in Canada, where the Prime Minister of Canada says we cannot afford to do what His Holiness tells us to do, which is to begin to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions because it will destroy the economy.
And Canada
we
clearly
elevate-
is not alone in that. I mean, many Western nations say the exact same thing.
So we elevate the economy above the very atmosphere that sustains us. So if that's the case, we've somehow lost our sense of what are the really important things that keep us alive.
Andrea Durbin. What are you most focused on right now?
Well, at Oregon Environmental Council, one of our biggest issues that we work on is climate change. And I think it's auspicious that we are meeting today on a global environmental summit discussion when we hear the news that we've reached that point of 400 parts per million. You know, my son recently asked me completely out of the blue, he said, "Mom, what are you doing to stop climate change?" And I turned to him and I was able to share some of the work that we're doing, but I had to tell him that we are not on the way to solving it. And when I think about what is the most significant environmental issue of my generation and of my children's generation, I think it is climate change. And I think, unfortunately, many children will be asking that question of us, what did you do to prevent climate change? And we will not be able to, at this point, we can't give a sufficient answer. We can only say not enough. But there's another issue as well that we're working on, which is the fact that we are exposing ourselves every day to untested, unregulated, toxic chemicals in the food we eat, in the water we drink, our air, the products we use, the buildings we live, work, and go to school in. And we are all we're all participating in a big chemistry experiment where we're learning more and more that these chemicals are being passed on from generation to generation, that these chemicals can last for hundreds of years, that babies are being born pre-polluted, that an American pregnant woman can be carrying, on average, 43 chemicals in her body that she would be passing on to her child in her womb. And so, to me, as we learn increasingly about the impact that these chemicals have, that these chemicals can cause cancer, autism, learning disabilities, early onset puberty, infertility, and birth defects, to me, that is just morally wrong. And I think that and we have a broken system in the United States. The United States regulations that regulate toxics haven't been updated in nearly 4 decades. And there are 80,000 chemicals that are in use today, and we've only tested 200 of them. And that's just, clearly we're out of step with where our laws need to be to protect human health. The European countries do it very differently. They require companies to prove that a chemical is safe before they allow it in the marketplace. And so that's the kind of change I think that we need to have. We need that kind of reform at a national level in Congress. I'd like to thank Senator Merkley because he has been a champion for this in Congress. But ultimately, to get national action, we've seen time and time again that it requires states to step up and act. And this is where Oregon can really do that. Oregon can step up and be a part of protecting human health and reducing the exposure we are seeing to toxic chemicals. The Oregon legislature right now is considering a bill called the Toxic Disclosure for Healthy Kids Act. And that bill would require disclosure and phase out of dangerous chemicals in children's products. So I would like to ask everybody here, if you believe it's our fundamental right to live in an environment that is free of toxics, that children have a right to play with toys that don't expose them to carcinogens or hormone-disrupting chemicals, that you convey that. You call on your legislator and you ask them to support the Toxic Disclosure for Healthy Kids Act, because we need that kind of change to happen at the states to protect our health, but we need that kind of change to happen to inspire action in Congress as well.
Andrea, I want to go back to the conversation that you said surprised you when your son, out of the blue, asked what you were doing to prevent climate change, and you said, this is what we're doing at the Oregon Environmental Council, but frankly, we're not quite doing enough. What did he say? What was his response?
He was actually kind of despondent about it. I think that is one of the challenges that I face as both a mother and as an environmental leader is, how do we give a sense of hope to all of us, but especially our young people, that this is possible to change? As we're hearing more and more news from our scientists, global scientists, that we're clearly headed in the wrong direction. And so for me, I think part of that hope is recognizing that we can make these changes, but it requires changes in our personal lives, but it requires political change as well. And I'm hoping that as we see movements forming in the Northwest, we've seen a movement forming to say, no, we're not going to be exporting coal from our region. We're seeing thousands of people go to Washington, D.C. and get arrested and say no to the Keystone Pipeline. That, to me, is inspiring and indicates that people recognize that we need to change our ways and we need to get off fossil fuels, but we need to hold our politicians accountable.
Good job.
So, Governor Kitzhaber, you are a father. You have a son, too. So I'm wondering if you've had similar conversations to the one that Andrea was just describing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think most young people wonder about the future, and I think that the challenge for the adults, as Andrea said, is to give them some hope. And I think there's no simple hope, there's no bumper sticker hope, but I think there's hope by trying to reframe the nature of the problem in a way that they can understand it, and that we can understand the components necessary for a solution. When Sylvia and I were in Bhutan last month, on the hike out from a monastery called Tiger's Nest, is a sign that says the source of all happiness is nature. And if you think about it for a minute, we all live by consuming nature. Life lives by consuming life. And so it's no surprise that our economy is based on consumption. The problem is that the whole economy, the premise of the economy, and the premise of giving people an opportunity to meet their basic needs is based on consumption and the assumption that that consumption can go on forever and at an increasing rate. And there's a couple problems with that model, and if I could just give you an analogy, if you imagine a donut, and the outside of the donut is the physical limits of the planet, and the hole in the middle of the donut represents sort of the social foundation, what people need to meet their basic needs and have the opportunity to participate and contribute to their community. The economy needs to hold us between those two. It needs to hold us in the donut, right? The problem is that's not happening. Global climate change, the decimation of our rainforest, the collapse of fisheries, a whole host of things suggest that the unlimited economic growth in a finite planet is beginning to bump up against the physical limits of our planet. And this economy that continues to grow is actually shrinking the middle. More and more people are impoverished, more kids are hungry, fewer and fewer people actually are being lifted up by that economy. And one of the problems is that we measure the wrong thing, so we don't really know how to register it. So the gross national product measures all the economic activity in the economy. So the New Horizon oil spill was great for the economy. That showed a plus in our growth model. Carnage on our highways, crime, the prison system, all positive. The war, in Afghanistan. We need, first of all, a new metric that balances and counts as a deficit environmental degradation, that counts as a plus stay-at-home mothers and volunteerism in the community and healthy kids. So part of it is the metric. The other part, I think the fundamental challenge then is to say, what does an economy look like that can operate within the economic or the environmental and physical limits of the planet, and one that actually moves everybody up? And we can't frame that debate by saying there are people who are wrong and right, because all of us, every last person in this room, depends on that economy, depends on that consumption economy. So it's not about creating, good people and bad people. It's about saying this is a problem that we have as a nation and as a planet, and how do we thoughtfully rethink the paradigm and the assumptions in our economy. And let me simply close by saying we're doing that in healthcare. We've decided that healthcare is not about financing medical care, it's about keeping people healthy. We're doing that. We're doing that in our educational system. So all I'm saying is that the systems we've relied on for decades need to be rethought based on the realities of the 21st century. And this is another one of those challenges. I think fundamentally rethinking the economy is the solution, the long-term solution to global climate change and to this conflict between economic activity and jobs and the environment.
I fundamentally disagree. I fundamentally disagree. I don't see how you can get a solution through a system that is so fundamentally defective that it is inevitably destructive. The economic system is based on the assumption that basically nature's services are free and limitless. We don't include the value of what nature is performing, all the services that make the planet habitable for us.
I think that's exactly what I
are
just
not
said.
included. And it's based on the assumption that the economy can grow forever. If we leave...
Did you hear me say that?
No, but
I'm not sure that I hear the disagreement that Dr. Suzuki that you're making here.
Well, if we're going to, well, maybe I misheard what you were saying, but I thought it's a matter of adjusting the economic system in order to...
It's a matter, well, we're going to have an economic system, but that's not going to disappear, it seems to me. The question is, how do you create an economic system that is not based on the assumption of unlimited growth and unlimited consumption?
Okay, I agree.
And if in fact we're going to have a consumption-based economy, and I'm not sure that I can't envision an economy that doesn't involve consumption or life that doesn't involve consumption, then what we consume and the rate at which we consume it really matters. And I think if you start on that assumption that it has to be sustainable both environmentally and socially, then it opens the field to some very creative thinking on what that might look like.
Dr. Suzuki, I want to hear more of your thoughts on this issue, because I know that you've actually worked with the UN to start thinking about some of these metrics of how you measure happiness, how you might put this together in practice. But Your Holiness, I wonder if we could bring you in here as well. As the governor has been saying, the standard old model for measuring how well a corporation or a country is doing is largely based on growth and consumption, whether it's share price or how big your house is, how many cars you have, how many dishes you can put on your dinner table. How do you think we should measure how well a society or an individual is doing?
Very difficult to say. Very difficult. One thing you mentioned, the economy based on agriculture, farming. See, they are, I think, they are real sort of economy, you see, with soil, with land. So they naturally more closer with nature. Their economy may not be big profit, but I think sustainable. Then those, you see, big factories, profit immense. But then these, actually, I think, a little bit isolated from nature. I think basically we human beings, we are part of nature. So still in our mind, deep inside, you see, we love the vegetation, or trees, or these things.
Plants and flowers.
Plant, flowers, these things. In big hotel, big city, even now, artificial sort of plants or artificial flowers usually kept. So it's much better. Living thing is much better than artificial. So this shows we originally come from, you see,
Nature, no?
I think our ancestors, their whole life very much depend on tree or these things, vegetations, these things. So I often was telling in India, the real transformation of India must take in rural area. Rural area remain poor, then big cities, you see a lot of constructions, a lot of factories, may not be sustainable economy. But of course, I'm not expert. I don't know. I really don't know. So this is I really feel, you see, the more sort of effort for farming like that, one thing. Then lifestyle. Many years ago, when Japanese economy go like that, I express, sooner or later, you will find some difficulties because of there is limitation. So it is better to keep some kind of sort of thinking. Yeah, this because of the
Economic
GDP
growth. Gross domestic product, GDP.
They may not go always like that. So therefore, it is better to make preparation or awareness. One day, reach limitation. So it is better. Otherwise, you see, at that time, unexpected, and then may get a big shock. Some people, I think, suicide also happen, isn't it? Some sort of head or big company expect it to go like that, and something happen, then it's unbearable, isn't it? So then afterward, after a few years, exactly see that happen. Then it's a growth. So you take for granted. That, I think, our way of thinking, just making money, and spend luxurious lifestyle. I think long run, not good. Perhaps I'm socialist. And even if you further, as far as socio-economic theory is concerned, I'm Marxist. Of course, freedom is extremely important. Without a freedom, those socialist countries collapse, failed. You see, because, you see, without a freedom, no human creativity nature properly should function. Without that, how can we develop? So freedom, extremely important. I think sometimes this huge gap, rich and poor, also, you see, harmful freedom of those poorer section of people. So therefore, they should think more seriously. I think the afternoon I will talk the importance of sense of concern, of well-being of other. The main sort of thing is we must develop oneness of humanity. So simply, too much self-centered attitude, selfish. One company, one family, one individual. Always to see, consume and greed, more greed, more greed, regardless of what other sort of consequences. That is, I think, a mistake. So we have to cultivate this. I think through law, I think difficult. I feel these must come through voluntarily. In order to come voluntarily, we must educate these people. The certain way of life, way of thinking is long run harmful. Make clear, like ecology, through education. Once the people realize that, then the way of selfish is really becoming more realistic selfish. See, regardless of other sort of consequences, just to think of yourself, it is a foolish selfish. So therefore, I think education is, I feel, key factor to educate from all these sort of things. Then, one side our mind, desire, greed come. Then one side of our mind say, oh, be careful, be careful. Through awareness, through education. That I feel, not impose or some restriction. That I think want to success. But I don't know. I don't know. So I never show the pretend way, pretend I know everything. No.
You fooled 11,000 people, though. I said you fooled 11,000 people who I think we think that you do know many of these answers.
That's unrealistic. Unrealistic. I always consider you and myself, because we are same human being. So, ignorance is part of human mind. So me too, a lot of ignorance. Difficult.
I wonder if I could ask any of you on stage, because there's a theme that's just come up, which sounds easy to say, but to me seems very, very hard to put into practice, which is that we have to change our relationship to consumption. If on some level, human life is always about consumption, breathing in and eating, but on a more materialistic way, increasingly about stuff, whether it's luxury goods or not. And on a very basic level, the more you consume, the more waste there is, the fewer natural resources there are. How do we change what has become a very, very ingrained way for many of us of living our lives? Anybody? An easy question.
Well, I think there's, I don't have an easy answer, but I think there's a couple things involved with that. The first one, as I mentioned, what we consume and the rate at which we consume it is very, very important. Basically, we can actually ultimately get to almost to a cradle-to-cradle recycling of existing goods and significantly reduce the impact. We could be mining landfills instead of the earth, for example. There's a lot of waste out there. There's a lot that could be done along those lines. So that's clearly part of it, and that's really a political issue, I think, more than a technical issue. The second one is I think we have to recognize that I think the pursuit of happiness in the founding documents of our nation has been very narrowly construed as being about the acquisition of more money and material goods. And there's good evidence to show that beyond a certain point, additional money doesn't add much to your general social well-being. And I think that what happens is that we lose two things in this rat race for more money and more material goods. We lose time to commit to our families and our communities, which really builds the social capital that holds us together as a society. And the second is people don't have time to contribute their own innovations and their own thinking to the fabric of our society. So I think we need to think of things like a social dividend for productivity, where instead of additional resources, people get some time off, that people get credit for volunteering in their community, that people get credit for...
And David Suzuki, I promised that we would get to some of your experience working with the UN to try to address these questions.
But I think this is a very difficult issue because, you know, my parents came through the Great Depression, and that scarred them for their lives. And because of that, they taught me these homilies, you know, live within your means, save some for tomorrow, help your neighbors because you may need their help at times, share, don't be greedy. These are things I was taught as a child, drummed into my head. But you know, the Depression was a very tough time on people around the world. And what brought us out of the Depression was World War II. And Mr. Roosevelt recognized as the war was coming to an end, well, what do? You can't keep producing guns and tanks and planes. What do we do in peacetime? And with the Council of Economic Advisors to the President, the solution came up was consumption. We've got to make consumption an American way of life. Worship at the altar of consumption. Buy stuff, use it up, throw it away, and it worked. And I think when 70% of the economy is now dependent on consumption, it's not just a matter of getting more efficient and reducing waste and so on. I think the economy itself is running on the necessity to keep amplifying consumption. And so that, I think, is a major challenge. And I think what you're saying is exactly right. We're not focusing on the right things about what makes us really happy. And one of the lessons I got, again, from my father was my great teacher. And when he was dying at 85, I moved in to care for him in the last weeks of his life. And it was one of the happiest times of my life. We laughed and cried and talked. And he kept saying, David, I die a rich man. He was not rich in economic terms, but he kept saying this over and over again. All we never talked about his closet full of fancy clothes or a big 1988 car he bought or a house he owned. All we talked about were family, friends, and neighbors and the things we did together. And that was his wealth. And in that he was a rich man. And it taught me that we think of prosperity in a weird way.
It occurs to me, though, that the real trick is getting to that kind of wisdom when we're younger.
So I say to people, we still have a generation of people who remember the lessons of the Depression. And elders now no longer have the pressures of a drive for money or power or fame. So I say to my fellow elders, get off the golf course and the couch, and let's get on with the lesson of remembering those lessons. Very good.
Well, and Dave, I think that examining our consumption habits and lifestyle choices is really one of the ways that we can make a stronger connection between the local and the global environment. You know, the old bumper sticker from years ago, think globally, act locally. Really re-examining how we consume, the choices that we make every day, what we buy, whether we drive or walk or use our bikes to get someplace, whether we reuse, repair, recycle, or throw something away. All of these are choices that we make every single day, thousands of times a day, that really do affect not just our local community, but the global community. And given the responsibility we share as Americans, given how much resources we consume, a third of the world's resources, I heard a story in NPR a couple of weeks ago that an American teenager consumes enough natural resources to fill 21 football fields. That's amazing and frightening to think about. And so those are the kinds of choices that we can make every day to improve our local environment and the global environment and really begin to change the economy so the economy is not driven just by our consumption habits. And we're starting to see some of this change. People are buying smaller homes, they're buying fewer new cars, they're driving less. Thank goodness for the millennials because they're foregoing cars. Thank you, all of you young people in the room who are getting rid of, not going for the vehicle. And so there was a study in Oregon recently, a poll that asked Oregonians, what do you think about consumption? And people say, the overwhelming majority believe that consuming less will not only help the environment, but will improve our quality of life. And so I think that is the kind of change that we need to make, and it's the kind of change that we don't have to rely on government to do. It's within us.
I want to remind our audience here and people watching perhaps online that if you want to join the conversation, the Twitter hashtag is Dalai Lama PDX. On Twitter, at least one person has been writing about population. We got a question before this conversation began from Shanti in San Francisco. This is for Your Holiness. Shanti wrote, from a Buddhist point of view, a human life is considered very auspicious. Considering the burden placed on the natural world to support an increasing population, do we still want to pray for an auspicious human rebirth when praying for sentient beings? Do we want more humans on the planet?
Good question. And firstly, I want to comment. See, always think about the material value, say lifestyle. So-called the developed countries, say, as you mentioned yesterday, sometimes it's a car, if it's 4 people, and then seems worthy, 1 car. Often, 1 car, just 1 person. And 1 family, 2 cars sometimes, isn't it? Now imagine, combine Indian population, Chinese population, over 2 billions. 2 billions car, difficult. So similarly, when population reaches 10 billion car, even space, where they put, difficult. So we must think, these problems which coming in any way, inevitable, these problems. So from now, we have to think and carry certain sort of contented lifestyle. It's, I think, much better. Now, in order to carry that, as your father mentioned, internal wealth, inner wealth, that's human affection, human friendship. These are most important. Person, very, very rich, maybe billionaire, but without real human friendship, that person, deep inside, very much lonely feeling. That eventually develop depression or too much relying on alcohol or drugs like that. And worst case, suicide. So therefore, the ultimate source of joyful life is within ourselves. That, of course, afternoon I will tell you, So according to my own sort of experience, it's very much the ultimate source of happy life, peaceful mind. It's within ourselves, not money. I often telling people, like one diamond, very high prices, very expensive, and also it can show, or other people say, oh, that person, some diamond things there. Some people, silly people, very much sort of admire, right? But so that diamond, if the person really feel depression, try to kiss, it's that diamond. The diamond never show you affection. Oh. Only, even you see, one small cat or dog, oh, if you treat nicely, when you feel a little sad, they will licking on you. You feel some comfortable, isn't it? Some comfort, isn't it? So therefore, ultimate source of joyfulness is within ourselves, a friendship, like that. So I fully agree. Actually, some sort of Buddhist literature mentioned,
In fact, in classical Buddhist texts, with respect to the concept of wealth, there is a discussion of what are referred to as the 7 internal riches.
knowledge and discipline, so on. Yeah, it is very true. Now that question, particular question. Yes, human life is very, very precious. Then entire precious human life really facing trouble or difficulties because of the too much population, the precious life. So therefore, I think smaller precious, right? Smaller number of precious life, happy, peaceful, I think much better. A lot of population, always busy, distrust, suspicion, bully each other, cheating each other. What is the meaning of precious? Right. And also, frankly speaking, precious life means we have special sort of ability to think deeper level. If we just our life depend on sensorial experiences, like animal also enjoy seeing something nice, hearing some positive voice, then they also enjoy it. We human beings, very superficial lifestyle, just seeing something nice, hearing some music, and good food, and good touch, and sex. What else? We have this sort of special sort of mental capacity. Use that and develop inner strength, develop inner peace. Then that person truly become precious human life. Otherwise, like animal.
David Suzuki, I want to circle back to a topic that I think all four of you have brought up in your own ways, which is a sense of interconnectedness. That a polluted river goes to the ocean, goes everywhere. A smokestack in Asia makes its way, the chemicals there make their way into the rain in Oregon. CO2 obviously knows no bounds. But I think so many of us think about our own families, our own tribes, our own countries, our own groupings of individuals as opposed to the larger picture. How do we change that?
We are profoundly local creatures, and I think that the tragedy in Bangladesh, where you get workers who work under terrible conditions for poor salaries so that we can buy cheap goods.
And just to remind folks, this is I don't know if this is the latest number, but I think at least 600 garment workers died there.
No, over 1,000.
Is it over?
Yes.
Over 1,000.
Yes, but that's a little reminder how interconnected we are. The problem is that the way that our media portray the world fragments and shatters that sense of interconnectivity. So that, for example, on any day, I'm sure in the Oregonian or the New York Times, you may read an article about a flood in Bangladesh, drought in Ethiopia, and forest fires in Canada, and they're all reported on different pages as if they've got nothing to do with each other. So we look at the world in this shattered way, and we don't see the image that we had with the first astronauts that went out into space and looked back on the Earth, and you saw it as a single entity with no signs of borders or any barriers. It was one single entity. We've lost that. We see the world shattered in that way. And again, His Holiness says, education, it should be built into our education from a time we're children, about the exquisite way that air and water and even soil that blows around the planet connect us together.
Andrea, is environmentalism, is it the wrong word? I mean, does it imply some separation between us and the natural world that can do some harm, even in a noble way?
But I think that the natural environment, we are all part of the natural environment. So I don't think it imbibes a separation. I think the problem is that there's a political separation. People want to politically separate. I hear people all the time saying, well, I support the environment, but I'm not an environmentalist. And
what do you think they mean by that?
I think that the issues have become so politicized in our country where, when you think about Senator Merkley started with some of our environmental achievements that Oregon is known for, our bottle bill, our beach bill, our legendary land use laws. And all of those happened decades ago. And that's really where we put our stamp out there in Oregon as an environmental leader. And since then, we've really seen a changing of our political systems. We've seen divisions between the economy and the environment. And I think that is fundamentally the problem, and that's why we need to kind of bring them back together and recognize that they are interconnected. And part of that is changing the way that we measure and what we measure and evaluate. The kinds of changes that the governor was talking about. We need to incorporate our natural wealth and the value of our natural environment into our economic system, as well as the cost of pollution that we face. But we also need to look at the social side and look at how wealth is being generated and how it's being distributed, health indicators, access to education, the amount of leisure time and family time we have, because it really bring that together. And I think the issue of sustainability has been problematic because it really has looked at the connection of the environment and the economy, but has left the social side out, even though technically it's supposed to be there. But we haven't done a good job of that. And if I think about, just looking here in our neck of the woods, kind of where this comes to mind for me is, there are organizations like the Coalition of Communities of Color that have done a great job of highlighting and bringing to attention the fact that our communities are facing significant inequities. If you're African American, Native American, Latino, or Asian Pacific Islander living in Multnomah County, you actually have lower incomes, less access to educational opportunities, worse health indicators than other similar communities of color around the country. And so that, to me, indicates that we've got a serious problem that we need to address, but part of that is expanding the scope and really looking at how do we integrate and what do we measure and how do we integrate environment, economy, and social outcomes. And so for me and my role at Oregon Environmental Council, looking at the economic and the environmental injustices is really important as well. You know, when we see communities housing next to freeways or factories, we see kids going to schools and unhealthy schools, we see lack of access to healthy and nutritious food, or planning that denies communities access to parks or safe sidewalks. That is fundamentally wrong, and we need to change kind of the way we are evaluating how we're doing, measuring, but also the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Because if we're ever going to improve overall community well-being, we have to look at beyond just unemployment rates and how we're doing on economic growth.
Governor, this is a very practical political question, if you look at it a certain way. If societies are going to put a price on carbon, economists say that it doesn't really make sense. It's a little bit unwieldy, or potentially you shoot yourself in the foot if you're alone in that. So you need to group together in large, or whether it's a number of states together or a number of countries together. This hasn't really happened yet in a significant way in the US. There have been some efforts. How do you get more states or more countries to come together and actually put a price on carbon?
Well, I think most people know in their heart, although they probably don't articulate it, that we will sooner or later be putting an explicit price on carbon. It's happened in California with the cap and trade system. It's happened in British Columbia with a carbon tax, which, by the way, is a much simpler, more direct way than the complex cap and trade mechanism.
It does have the word tax in it, though.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Well, I mean, talking about politics, it's
a taxing issue, and I'm dealing with it right now in the legislature, so
Yes.
let's not go there. So I think the point is that we're going to get there. We need to become much more explicit about having this conversation. It's beginning to surface here in this state. I'm sure it will surface in Washington under Governor Inslee's jurisdiction. And I think, for example, if the West Coast were to move in that direction together, that in fact is the 6th largest economy in the world, and Sylvia has coined the term trickle-up leadership, where you can actually drive national policy change from local jurisdictions. I think we're doing that with healthcare. I think you could probably do it with something like that.
Your Holiness, I wonder if we could move full force into a question that's been around the edges here, which is what the secular world and other faiths can learn from a particularly Buddhist understanding of the environment.
Oh. I think those the religious, because the Thoma Ujjing, Thoma Sultan, founders of these different religious traditions. I think most of them around 2,000 years ago. So at that time, ecology problem not there. However, like I think Jainism, one of the ancient sort of Indian spiritual tradition, very much respect any sort of form of life. So this is very much related. And then Hinduism, you see, respect nature. So these things, I think, are very relevant to today's world. Then in Buddhism, Buddha, usually you see, some people used to say, and also I also insist because of that, agree. Buddha, his birth, instead of in the palace, his mother used to give birth under one tree. Then, when Buddha enlightenment, not in cave, but under tree. Then his final sort of death, not in the monastery, but again under tree. And then in Vinaya, the monastery,
Monastic precepts. In the monastic precepts,
is he mentioned the monk should cultivate
plants,
plants,
plant trees.
plant tree, and then they move at that time. I mean, at that time, monk, no permanent residence, go here and there. So the next group of monk come, then how they should take care those plantations which were carried by the previous
Group.
group. So that shows, you see, the Buddhists very much sort of interest or concern about ecology. Nowadays in Thailand, some other Buddhist countries, some monk very much active regarding preservation of forest, like that. Otherwise, I don't know. Not much to say. Yeah. Then I think, perhaps usually, as I believe, and also telling people, one unique concept in Buddhist philosophy, that is interdependency, interconnectedness. So that I usually telling people, that concept come from Buddhist sort of tradition, but it is applicable in every field, economy, environment issue, and global issue. See, the reality, as you mentioned, everything interdependent. So therefore, again, I may sort of repeat, if we remain animal thinking, then only your own family. Animals never think about the outside, their own group. We have this special sort of brain, and we have the sort of ability, reasoning, and long-term interest. So now today, global economy, not based on one nation, but whole world interrelated. And environment issue, whole world is facing because of the similar problem. So therefore, you see, we use human intelligence, then thinking these things, then automatically, now for example, the Buddhist sort of concept, we call entire sentient being mother sentient being. Mother sentient being. All sentient beings are very dear to oneself, as your own, this life's mother. So we call mother sentient being. So therefore, you see, they practically, of course, for the time being, forget about other galaxies, just our own world here. The 7 billion human beings, their future very much interconnected, interdependent. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. So the century-old thinking, just we and they, I think that outdated. We must increase the concept of we, big, entire 7 billion human beings. Entire sort of species of mammals on this planet is part of we. So, I think that through awareness, not thinking about next life or heaven or nirvana, simply how to build happy society, happy humanity on this small planet. We have to think rest of the human beings' sort of well-being. So these are something necessity. to, because of that, to develop happy future. So this, I think we only human beings can can do these things, not other animal. So therefore, too much materialistic way of life is, I think, if we look from from certain viewpoint, then we simply like other animal. As I mentioned earlier, not precious human being. If we use our unique thing about our mind and thinking long-term interest and larger term, then we truly become human being. So all this, not through prayer, not through blessing, but through education. So education is the key factor. The existing education system, not adequate. If you look from certain sort of angle, then I think the existing education system is very much oriented about material value. Of course, I myself, modern education should be that.
He's only saying that, of course, on the personal level, he's speaking from someone who has had no exposure to modern education.
So it is quite silly, I think, quite because of that too much bold.
Quite presumptuous.
Person, no modern education, but criticize modern education. It is because of that. Injustice there.
Presumptuous.
I think all of you have mentioned education at one point or another this morning. We got a comment from Juliet M. Zimmer on Twitter. She said, I agree, education is key, but how do you suggest we approach those who are willfully ignorant or worse, apathetic? I can assume when she means willfully ignorant, one possibility is people who refuse to acknowledge that humans are causing climate change. There are other kinds of ways to be willfully whatever in the world. Also different brands of apathy. Who wants to jump in to respond to this question from Juliet Zimmer?
Well, I think part of the problem is I think people act when they can see that it has a direct benefit on them. I think people act when they can see that it has a benefit to their community. And the example I'll give you is the watershed councils that we've set up around Oregon, which took people who considered themselves environmentalists and timber industry folks, industrialists, who had been fighting each other on a whole host of issues, and they worked together to improve the health of a piece of watershed in their area. And I think that sense of community is very, very important. And I think solving this problem, as well as many other problems, does involve creating local ways where people can be engaged with people that they know to not only address the issue, raise their level of awareness, but also build community, which I think is the adhesiveness that holds us together as a society. And when you lose that, we break down into sort of consumers and partisans rather than citizens, and it creates a zero-sum politics where there's always a winner and loser. And I think that's really where we are today. So if you tell someone in Roseburg who's basically can't get a job anymore in the wood products industry that they need to do something about climate change, it has really no relevance to their daily lives. And so creating, I think, those local and regional opportunities for engagement is a key element in bringing about this kind of change.
Dr. Suzuki, how do you approach this question? As I mentioned, as a scientist, as an educator, and a broadcaster.
During the 70s and 80s, when British Columbia was really torn over the issue of the forests in the province, the premier tried to deal with that by setting up what he called roundtables, where you get all the stakeholders, the vested interests of different kinds around the round table, and then kind of hash out something. This was his way of delaying any action on it. But the problem with the idea of stakeholders is each stakeholder comes in with their own little point of view and their interests, and they're going to fight for that. And you end up with some kind of a compromise. It never really is satisfying to anybody in the end. And my suggestion is that we should have roundtables in which we leave our vested interests outside and begin from a discussion of what do we all agree on. I'm tired of fighting, because when you have a fight, there's a winner and a loser. Can we all begin with a platform of agreement and then build the way we live on the basis of that? So how about this? How about this for a start? What is the absolutely most important thing that every one of us needs in order to survive and flourish? Well, of course, it's a breath of air. The moment we left our mother's body, we needed a breath of air. That first breath was to inflate our lungs and announce we've arrived. And from that moment on to the last breath before we die, we take air into our bodies and we filter whatever is in it. So surely clean air should be the absolutely highest priority that any society or group would work to protect. And if we can't, and it's the same with water, every one of us is 60 to 70% water by weight. We're a part of the hydrologic cycle. Water cartwheels around the planet. We imbibe it. It leaves us, and it's a part of that cycle. Our very essence is that we are water. We are the earth through the food that we consume and make into our bodies. If we cannot agree that those are our absolutely most fundamental needs that must be protected above everything else, then we build an economy, and so, then I'd say it's hopeless. So we've got to start from that level.
Your Holiness, staying on this question of how you get people to embrace new knowledge, one thing that I think is well known about you is that when you travel the world, you meet with scientists. You're very eager to talk to neuroscientists, to climate scientists, to find out the latest science, the latest knowledge, human knowledge about the world, and to embrace it even when it goes against older Buddhist teachings sometimes, or older traditions. You embrace the new, you embrace the science. How do you convince people, whether they're Buddhist or not, whether they're religious or not, who hold tight to older ideas, how do you convince them to open their eyes to the new?
I think we should be realistic. So when the new reality comes, then it's a certain old concept which develop the situation at that time. Now, at that time, realistic. Now, situation change, then that thinking is unrealistic. So we have to change. It's quite simple. I think we Tibet, in our own land, cold, high altitude, so certain our lifestyle, including our dress, accordingly. And then come to India, very hot, lowland. It is foolish to say, oh, this is our custom. Oh, where first, First, in hot climate, oh, this is our tradition. We must keep this. Silly, unrealistic. So as things change, reality change. We have to act according to reality. Even including religious belief. If, as I mentioned earlier, when the founders say, at that time, it's a different situation. And then a certain concept developed according to existing situation at that time. Now situation changed. And also human knowledge also much increased through, I think, scientific research. So for example, I'm Buddhist. Of course, I sort of, what's the part of my sort of prayer, I also visualize world. But then, in my prayer, my world is a round world, not flat, not Mount Meru. Traditionally, we believe world flat, and center Mount Meru, and the sun and the moon, same level, go like that. That's unrealistic. That's not true. At that time, people have that kind of belief. Okay, it worked. But now we have better knowledge of the reality. So we have to accept the reality. Still, I hope I still believe. I hope I still Buddhist, but no longer believe, you see, Mount Meru.
One of the big questions that's threaded throughout all of this, and that we've touched on, but I want to really zero in on now, is how you move from words, even elevated, beautiful words, and concern, anxious concern about the world and where it's headed, into action, into concrete action. Andrea Durbin, where do you start with that? How do you get people to change their behaviors, to do something in the world?
Well, it's a good question because it's one that we grapple with every day. We're about changing behavior and practices. And we've talked a lot about education as being a key part of that. And it is providing information and education is important, but it doesn't always compel people to change. It is, however, the one aspect that gives me the most hope about the future, because as we see our young people being educated and embracing the fact that climate change is happening and that we need to change the way that we live, it does give me a sense of hope. But ultimately, it takes often making a direct economic self-interest case, that there's a reason somebody should change the way they're acting or behaving because it'll benefit them, or because it's a social norm or their social persuasion to do so. That others, their neighbors, their friends, everybody else is doing it, so it's okay, it's accepted. And those aspects are generally required. And so we need people to adopt different practices and be the first innovators and leaders out there willing to change those social norms. Those are critical people because they will lead the rest of us to make changes in our daily practices. But I also think about applying the question from individual level to government level. What does it take to change governments to protect the environment? And years ago, decades ago, when the environmental laws were written in this country, when Oregon set out its environmental achievements, it was done in a very different manner. It was done in a bipartisan largely led by Republicans. In our state, Governor Tom McCall was probably the clearest, strongest environmental governor we've had in our history. And people argue that President Nixon, was the strongest president we've had on the environment in the country. And I think that there is a difference of setting a vision out, but also a difference of cooperation that we really lack today. And I hope that we can rebuild, because it's going to take cooperating on both sides of the aisles. We all share the value of clean air, clean water, an unpolluted landscape. No matter how we vote, we should be able to work together and set out ways to protect our environment.
Governor Kitzhaber, I'm very curious, from your perspective as a very successful politician, you've never lost a race, am I right about that?
I was defeated in my first election for class president of my medical school class.
Okay. If we take that off the record. So, from a politician's perspective, what would you recommend that citizens do to get politicians' attention?
Well, I think it's broader than that. I think the whole question of Thomas Pynchon in Gravity's Rainbow said, if you keep asking the wrong questions, you don't have to worry about the answers. And I think one of the problems, just to get back to your question about the carbon tax, the fact is we already have a tax on carbon, we just don't pay it directly. We pay it in hospital costs for people who have lung problems and mercury poisoning. We pay it in cleaning up, the Exxon Valdez, the New Horizon. We pay it for the military that protects our oil supplies. So it's hidden.
That on the one hand, we need a fundamental shift or a paradigm shift in the way we see our place on the planet. But at the same time, we're faced with the reality that we have a very, very urgent crisis right now, just in terms of the atmosphere. And so we're kind of torn between that. In the long run, you see, I believe that and I talked to the head of the Green Party in Canada a lot about this because she's a friend of mine. There shouldn't be a Green Party. The environment shouldn't be a political issue. It should be a part of what we are as a people. But the problem is that that's a much longer term shift that we're going to have to work on. The other one is the immediate crisis now. And for that, His Holiness talks about, how we have to act as one species or one group. And the only time we see that is in science fiction movies when an alien from outer space comes and starts killing people, and then you get the president of China calling the Russian president, calling the American, then we all act as a single species. And I would have thought that the atmosphere that affects all of us is that crisis. Mind you, we're the people causing it, but it is the unifying issue. I was starting my senior year in college at Amherst College in 1957. And on October 4th, 1957, we were electrified to hear the announcement that the Soviet Union had launched Sputnik. And we didn't know there was a space program. And of course, America then tried to launch its own rockets, and every one of them blew up on the launch pad, or after taking off, blew up. Meanwhile, the Russians launched the first animal in space, a dog, the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, the first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. Americans didn't say, oh my God, we can't catch up, we'll destroy the economy. Americans rose up and said, we've got to beat these guys, we've got to catch up and beat them. And when Kennedy announced the race to the moon, nobody complained about the cost of the economy. And it was a remarkable thing. Here I was, a foreigner in your country. All you had to do was say, I like science, and you threw money at us. It was great. It was a glorious time. And look what happened. Not only is America the only country to land people on the moon, but think of all of the things no one anticipated that came out of it. GPS, 24-hour-a-day news, well, maybe that's not so great. Cell phones, all of the stuff that came out as a result of that one commitment. We've got to lick this challenge. It's un-American to say we can't do anything about this. It's not the American way.
This is a global issue, and we've been talking about these issues on many different levels, but one of them is very personal. It's just on the household level, on the individual level. I'm wondering what all of you, if you've made changes in your lives over the last couple years that now are a part of your daily practice as a direct response to environmental issues. Anybody want to jump in? What this has meant in your own lives?
Well, for me, it was my wife who has constantly said, the problem is that men create messes and then move on. Any woman knows it's global housekeeping, and she said, David, you're a known entity. Someone is going to come through your garbage at some point. You better do something about the garbage. And with a great deal of effort, thanks to the prodding of my wife, we've radically reduced our garbage output. I think it's less than a green bag a month. But The other thing, though, is yes, there are lots of things that we can do, and there are books out about the 10 or 20 easy ways to save the planet. I don't believe that, but there are things that we can all do that are very effective if enough of us do things to reduce our footprint. But I believe right now we need political action, and that we have to be eco-warriors on behalf of our children and grandchildren, and we've got to become much more involved politically.
Andrea?
Well, I agree with David that we need political action, and I would add to that we need campaign finance reform in this country to make sure that the oil industry, the coal industry, that our fossil fuel industries are not making the decisions to keep us committed to the fossil fuel future. But your question about daily practices, I think living in Portland, we're kind of in this bubble, and we all appreciate this bubble. I've been in Portland for 7 years, and one of the clear changes I've made is being able to bike more and being able to take my kids and putting my kids and biking with them to school to do errands. I really applaud the city of Portland's composting program. I think it's done an amazing job for reducing what's going to the landfills. I think all of us are making real changes there. And one thing personally I do, which is a lot of fun with my friends, is I share clothes. We do lots of clothing swaps. And I've seen this happen around the city of Portland a lot, that people are looking to, how do we buy less, trade more? We don't all need to have a lawnmower. We can share lawnmowers. You don't all have to have a car. You can share a car. These are the kinds of opportunities that I know Portland is really innovating around, and I hope other cities will emulate.
Governor, have you been doing jeans and cowboy boot swaps?
Well, actually, I just have 2 wardrobes, this one and my jeans, so I'm saving on fabrics. I think on the direct question, probably being associated with Sylvia Hayes for 10 years, totally walks the walk and makes me hear about it every day from morning to night. I just want to make a comment on the importance of political action and the importance of campaign finance reform. I agree completely. But we have to be more specific about what it is we want that political action to accomplish. It's not just regulation. It's not just changing the tax system. It is changing the fundamental assumptions of our economic model in a way that doesn't dislocate millions of voters in the process of doing it. Because, that's the reality. And I think the moon example is great. I was 11 years old, and we bought our first television to watch that launch, and it was amazing. But when Kennedy gave the speech, he didn't give us a roadmap, he gave us a destination. And a clear destination, an inspirational destination that connected with American creativity and not being number one. And we rose to that challenge. And I think we need the same thing with our economy. There are questions we haven't answered. We're talking around the fundamental question, which is the growth and consumption basis of the economy. It is what it is, and we need to change that. And my experience is that you get people to move politically when they can see where you need to end up, and you give them that goal. And so that's the fundamental question we have to ask, I think, and answer in the next few years, so that we can really engage the political process towards changing the underlying assumptions of the economy, which I think is the root cause of the issues we're discussing here today.
Your Holiness, we have a few minutes left if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us.
Education. I think education, not just mere knowledge or information. But education, I think the real purpose of education, I think firstly, should develop conviction. That conviction also should be based on realistic. So in order to develop that, I think Buddhist literature mentioned 3 levels of understanding. First level of understanding is through hearing, listen, and then simply recorded in your brain, the information. That is not very stable, not very sound. Now on that basis, on that sort of information, based on that information, then analyze, experiment, and also, you see, they try to seek information from different sources. Then you yourself analyze. Then you understand about that subject through, we call analytical meditation, is really based on reason,
Critical thinking.
critical thinking. So that develops conviction. Now, in order to analyze realistically, your mind should be open, or should not be biased. Biased mind cannot see objectively. So in order to analyze things, your mind must be very neutral. So these things, I think, are important. Then, of course, third level of understanding is through experience. Conviction translates into implementation. Then through that way, and then you have some kind of
Then you can, you truly understand whatever it is based on your own personal experience.
So that I just want to say. Otherwise, you see, the education, just to copy from books or from some sort of explanation, then that one day this person mentions something and you may feel, oh, wonderful. Then the other day, another sort of information come, and then again you feel, oh, wonderful. Then confuse your own mind. If the thing truly understand the thing to analyze, if can, and also to
Critical
experiment, then your understanding is truly firm. So someone tells different way, then you feel no. I analyze, carry experiment, now this is true. So that knowledge is truly can change your way of life out of sort of conviction. So that's, I think, education. I think that's something important that I want to share.
Well, Your Holiness, Governor Kitzhaber, Andrea Durbin, and David Suzuki, thank you all so much for your time and for your shared wisdom.
Sorry. Oh, some problem. Now old person. You also some problem.
You know, I taught your monk science in Dharamsala.
Oh, right.
I met you in Delhi
Right,
with
right.
my family many years ago.
That's right, yes. Your face quite familiar in my mind. Quite recorded here. Quite well recorded. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Come. I think now lunch, isn't it? Luncheon. So, good.
As you can tell from the hand signal, it is time for lunch. There's a break until 1:30. If you pre-purchased a lunch, they are in the exhibition hall. If you want to buy food right now, I'm told there are many vendors in the main corridor. If you go outside and want to come back, keep in mind you're going to have to go through security, so hold on to your ticket. And once again, thank you so much.